Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum takes place this weekend in the main event of UFC Fight Night Vegas 24, Whittaker versus Gastelum, and I can't wait for this middleweight main event. It is a title elimination bout. The winner of this one should most definitely be taking on Israel Adesanya next in that middleweight division after Marvin Vettori's performance against Kevin Holland. It wasn't that impressive. It was a good win, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't really a massive win to let him leapfrog a guy like Robert Whittaker if he were to be successful against Kelvin Gastelum. And I would argue as well, even if Kelvin Gastelum goes out there and beats Robert Whittaker, which I believe if he does go out there and beat Robert Whittaker, it's probably going to be by KO in the first or second round, him just catching Whittaker on the chin or something like that, because I don't see him winning a decision against Whittaker. I believe that Kelvin Gastelum has also earned a title shot if he does beat Whittaker this weekend. He'd have a big win over the number one contender in the middleweight division. There's history between him and Israel Adesanya. It was a really tough fight for Israel Adesanya. I wouldn't mind seeing that rematch either. So this is definitely a title elimination bout in the middleweight division. Whittaker shouldn't even have to take this bout to get his title shot back against Israel Adesanya, but he's doing it anyway because that's the kind of guy Robert Whittaker is. No easy fights, and I am picking Robert Whittaker to win this one by TKO. I think he's going to get a head kick finish against Kelvin Gastelum, have his best performance he's ever had in his entire career. He's got more momentum than he's ever had over the past few years. He's been looking better and better in each every fight. Don't get me wrong, they've been close fights. Him and Darren Till, very close fight, but we also saw Kelvin Gastelum and Darren Till. He lost that very close fight with Darren Till, but Robert Whittaker was able to do quite well against Darren Till and beat him. Also, Jared Cannonier in his last fight as well. Extremely close fight, but Robert Whittaker gets it done. He finds a way to get the win. He is that kind of veteran. A very tricky situation at the end of that fight with Jared Cannonier, but in my opinion, Jared Cannonier is a much harder hitter than Kelvin Gastelum, and also much more of a dangerous matchup for Robert Whittaker than Kelvin Gastelum. There's a reason why Whittaker's a favourite in this matchup, and I believe he was a slight underdog against Jared Cannonier in their matchup not too long ago at UFC 242. However, I think Whittaker's got this one in the bag. I don't want to be too sure about it though, because we know how things go when I say that there's no way Curtis Blaydes can possibly lose to Derek Lewis, and then Derek Lewis just lands that one punch out of nowhere. I understand that there is a chance in this bout for Kelvin Gastelum to land that big shot that could change everything. He has that power, but I just don't have the evidence to back that up into a prediction for me to say that Kelvin Gastelum goes out there and beats Robert Whittaker. I think this is going to be a great matchup for Robert Whittaker. Finally, a shorter middleweight than himself. Finally, a guy as well that has a reach advantage over. I mean, Adesanya had a massive reach advantage over Robert Whittaker, and I believe that he didn't really have that much of a reach advantage over guys like Darren Till or Jared Cannonier either. Robert Whittaker, he's got a reach advantage, he's got a height advantage. I believe that's going to be very effective for his style. A lot of the stuff that Whittaker uses is going to be very good against a guy like Kelvin Gastelum. If you look at, in my opinion, the three best moves that Whittaker does in fact have, other than the head kick combination that I think he's going to finish Kelvin with in the end of the second round, the best moves I have of Robert Whittaker are the front kick to the body, in my opinion, the oblique kick as well to the knee, where he tries to completely ruin someone's knee, and we'll talk about Kelvin Gastelum's knee in a second, because Kelvin's had a bunch of surgeries, tore his ACL, tore his MCL, tore his LCL, no ligaments left in that knee. Pretty tricky situation when you're going up a guy against Robert Whittaker who does like to stop that knee and destroy people's legs. He did that to Darren Till in their fight. I believe that Whittaker's best moves are those two moves, and plus his jab as well, which comes from the hip. And I think against a guy like Kelvin Gastelum, who hunches over, who comes forward, plods forward, tries to make you make a mistake, and he tries to catch you with a big shot while you're overextending, if Whittaker doesn't go out there and just lunge forward and be reckless, I do believe he'll win this one against Kelvin Gastelum. The oblique kick's going to be more effective because he's fighting a shorter opponent. He doesn't have to telegraph it as much. He doesn't have to lift that big leg up and then stomp it down on a guy like Israel Adesanya the same way that he could do against Kelvin Gastelum, where he could just sort of flick it from the waist. You've got the front kick as well for Robert Whittaker. Kelvin Gastelum's a very square opponent, very wide at the torso as well. That's a big target for that front kick. Going to be easier to land on a shorter opponent that's not so fast and doesn't use too much crazy footwork either, and hasn't used too much crazy footwork since that very close loss to Darren Till, where he hurt his knee in the Jack Hermansson bout as well. Had to recover from that one. Hermansson tore his ACL in half in that fight. Really bad submission win before Jack Hermansson, but bad for Kelvin Gastelum. It was a good submission win for Jack Hermansson, but all of that damage in those knees Kind of seeing a difference in the footwork of Kelvin Gastelum. He's not the springboard that he was against Israel Adesanya, where he was lunging in and out movement and darting all over the place and really being a problem for Israel Adesanya. His footwork has started to get a little bit more rudimentary. I think he's going to be walking into a lot of front kicks, and the jab from the hip from Robert Whittaker are going to be much more effective against a shorter opponent, just popping it in there against Kelvin Gastelum, who he has a reach advantage over. I just think there's so much in Robert Whittaker's favour, and there was so much not in Robert Whittaker's favour. For the Whittaker fight, he'd been off for ages. How's he going to look coming back after a KO loss to Israel Adesanya? He took maybe too much damage in the Romero fight. Now Israel Adesanya's KOing him. Maybe this means Whittaker's chin's gone. He goes in there against Darren Till, gets the job done against Jared Cannonier. Stylistic nightmare of a matchup. Brutal one-punch KO power from Jared Cannonier. Absolute behemoth for the division. A massive guy. Came down from heavyweight to light heavyweight to the middleweight division. Has reach over Robert Whittaker as well, or at least has a close reach with Robert Whittaker. Really dangerous matchup, and Whittaker still went out there and get it done. Now you're going to tell me that Whittaker has a really good matchup for himself and he's going to lose? That sounds a lot like MMA to me, and it worries me for that very reason. Kelvin is very dangerous and he can land that big shot, but I watched his fight with Ian Heinisch. I believe they put it out on YouTube for a free fight like yesterday or something like that. I remember watching it. He wasn't doing all that well in that fight, okay? I'm telling you this right now. Kelvin Gastelum did beat Ian Heinisch, and he beat him quite convincingly as well over the 3 rounds. Very close fight. I'd argue that it was sort of as close as Whittaker versus Cannonier. Very close competitive fight. The rounds were very close, but it was clear that Whittaker was getting the better of the moments. Kelvin might have had a bit more of a clear win against Ian Heinisch, don't get me wrong, but still, very competitive fight. All of those rounds were pretty close. Heinisch would have his moments where he would take the back of Kelvin Gastelum, get him down a couple of times, go for a couple of Kimuras, land a flying knee here and there, and Kelvin would just pick it in from a range and land some decent shots here and there that would win him the fight on significant strikes overall, and actually showed that he's very capable of going out there and wrestling quite well against a guy like Ian Heinisch. He had great takedowns himself. I don't see him being able to use takedowns against Robert Whittaker, and on the feet against a guy like Ian Heinisch, who is so slow. Sorry, I like Ian Heinisch. He's so slow. He's really, really slow compared to Robert Whittaker, and I played them side by side, watching Whittaker's fight with Jared Cannonier and Kelvin's fight with Ian Heinisch. The speed difference between Whittaker and Heinisch is night and day, and Heinisch was loading up some big bombs, not moving too well, really gassed and laboured in those later rounds, and Kelvin could still not go out there and land that big punch. And I don't think he's going to be winning a decision against Whittaker. I don't think he's going to be out grappling Whittaker. So the one chance I'm going to give Kelvin here is to land that big shot that's going to change the fight, land on Whittaker's chin, make Whittaker go wobbly a little bit, and then maybe finish the fight afterwards. That's where I think his best chance of success is, and I didn't even see him do that against a guy like Ian Heinisch, who was there to be hit so much in that fight, and Kelvin couldn't quite find his timing. The movement wasn't quite there, the reaction time wasn't quite there. He's got a little bit more hesitant throughout his career. He's not really trusting in his chin as he once did before the Israel Adesanya fight you saw against Tyron Woodley. He just walked down Tyron Woodley in that fight. I know he had a weight advantage because he missed weight for that fight, but still, walked down Woodley, took massive bombs on the chin and just ate them well and kept coming forward. I mean, Kelvin Gastelum's always had a granite chin. Being dropped 4 times against Israel Adesanya is going to change some things about the way that he fights, and I think we're seeing a little bit more of a hesitant Kelvin Gastelum, and I think that's going to be his downfall in this fight against Robert Whittaker. Whittaker's going to stay at range, land the oblique kick, land the front leg side kick to the knee as well, try and blow out that leg that already doesn't have any ligaments whatsoever, so it's going to be a little bit less fortified than it would normally be. I think that's a huge problem for Kelvin Gastelum. Also, the front kick to the body from Robert Whittaker is going to be there all night. I think he'll land that as Kelvin's trying to pressure him. The jab from Robert Whittaker, I believe, is going to be there all night. I think he'll head kick finish Kelvin in the 2nd or 3rd round. Once Kelvin's been beaten up a little bit on the feet, I think this is going to be a very high-paced fight. Robert Whittaker pushes a higher pace than Kelvin Gastelum does. He has a higher strikes landed per minute. He does push a higher pace than Kelvin does, especially over Kelvin's last few fights, especially. I think Whittaker's going to piece him up, and then eventually Gastelum's not going to take the shots the same way anymore, and Whittaker's going to mix up that jab with a 2 behind it. Eventually, once that 2 starts landing a little bit more often, he's going to start doing the jab-2 head kick combo, and I'm calling the same thing that landed on Jared Cannonier in the 3rd round, where I called Whittaker by 3rd round TKO. Very close. I'm calling it again And I'll say in the third round again. I said late second before, but I think he's going to take a little while to wear down Gastelum first. I don't think Gastelum's one of these guys who is ever going to get KO'd in the first round. I don't see anyone going out there and just one shot, boom, and down goes Kelvin Gastelum. I think you've got to break him down first, really injure him here and there, make him feel a little bit weaker. Then he doesn't start bracing himself as much for those shots, and the head starts popping back a little bit more like it did in the 5th round against Israel Adesanya. But this time I think Whittaker's going to finish him with a head kick in the 3rd round. I can see it happening so well in my mind, but I can also see the different side of the coin, which is Kelvin just landing that one punch that changes everything. But Whittaker can land that one punch, man. That's the problem that I'm having with this kind of stuff. Like, I know Kelvin can land that shot. He can. He landed it against Israel Adesanya, but Adesanya took it, rolled with it, took the shot well. I know he got rocked by that head kick at one point as well. It was a pretty tough fight for Israel Adesanya. He got hurt a couple of times in that bout, but he wasn't out cold from it. Like, Kelvin Gastelum's never been this kind of guy who's going to one-punch KO people, like Jared Cannonier was, just fucking one big uppercut to Jack Hermansson, and down goes Jack Hermansson, finishes him off in the 1st round, finishes off David Branch as well before that. He had a bunch of other finishes as well in his career. He's got crazy power, Jared Cannonier. With Kelvin Gastelum, never dropped Ian Heinisch, landed a bunch of shots on him. Nothing really seemed to happen to Ian Heinisch. Against Jack Hermansson, he didn't even get a chance before he was submitted in the 1st round. Landed a bunch of good shots on Darren Till on the chin throughout that fight. Didn't really seem to have the same sting on them as they once did before. Didn't really have too much power there. Then you've got his fight against Israel Adesanya. Managed to hurt Israel Adesanya a couple of times in that bout. Jacare Souza fight. Dropped him. Wasn't able to finish him. You've got Whittaker able to finish a guy like Jacare Souza. He beat Michael Bisping. And that's the one KO win that he's had since his fight with Tim Kennedy in 2016. Do I believe that he's going to now KO Robert Whittaker? And by the way, the only way that he finished Tim Kennedy in that bout was because Tim Kennedy was completely gassed out and Kelvin was just sticking it on him in the 3rd round and eventually put him down to a TKO. He also beat Vitor Belfort. That got overturned, but that was also a TKO loss, I guess. So he actually has had a TKO win since 2016. In fact, of March 2017, he KO'd Vitor Belfort. But again, it wasn't a one-punch KO. It was like a recoverable situation for a guy like Whittaker. But Vitor Belfort's a little bit spent. He's had his time in the spotlight. He was definitely off roids for that fight with Kelvin Gastelum, and Kelvin put him away in the 1st round. I really don't see Kelvin KOing Robert Whittaker. I see Weidman as a man with not the best of chins. He got dropped by Kelvin, got back up, worked the takedown, got the submission in that fight. I don't think Kelvin's the one-punch powerhouse. If you wanted to say that Jared Cannonier has that chance of landing that big punch, maybe I could see an argument, like, for allowing that prediction to be made. He was a favourite in that fight for a reason. I picked Whittaker as an underdog. But with Kelvin, I don't know if the evidence is there. It can happen. Anything can happen. Derek Lewis beat Curtis Blades. Okay? Anything can fucking happen in this sport. But I need evidence. And Whittaker's got all of it in favour of Kelvin here. I'm picking Whittaker to win. Pretty confident in this one. But Whittaker could get KO'd and I'd feel so bad if that happened. I'm not picking him because I'd feel bad if he lost, by the way. I genuinely think he's going to go out there and whoop Kelvin Gastelum for as long as this fight lasts. And if you don't believe me, I thought that all the way back in 234, UFC 234, where they were supposed to fight the first time. I actually predicted him to head kick KO Gastelum there as well. I've had this read for a while in terms of Whittaker versus Gastelum and how the matchup goes. But if Kelvin ruins this for Whittaker, I'd feel so bad. But Whittaker's going to win. He's going to get the title shot against Israel Adesanya. And he's going to lose, goddammit. He's going to lose that title shot again. Nah, I'm joking. I don't know if he's going to lose again, but he probably will lose again to Israel Adesanya. By decision, I'd reckon this time. But if Kelvin wins, bring in Kelvin. Beat Ian Heinisch. Had a decent performance there. Nothing crazy, but got a good win. This time he'll have a win streak. He just beat Whittaker by KO if he does win. If he wins impressively, maybe it's a scrap back and forth and Kelvin gets his hand raised. I'd say use the momentum of Kelvin's name. Having himself tied to a massive war with Israel Adesanya in the past is always going to help a bit of pay-per-view numbers whenever they do fight again. So I think Kelvin's earned his right to a title shot as well, because I know people are going to say stuff like, well, Kelvin lost to Jack Hermansson and Marvin just beat Jack Hermansson, so Marvin deserves it. I don't want to give Marvin a title shot yet. I want to build Marvin. Kelvin's already a name. He's already established. If he beats Whittaker, he'll be even more of a name. Kelvin's earned it as well if he wins. Title elimination bout in the middleweight division we've got on our hands here. 100%. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Click that button up there. Toodle pip. Robert Whittaker by head kick in the second round. The third round. Robert Whittaker by head kick in the third round. The same one he landed on Jared Cannonier. This time it finishes Kelvin. Like and subscribe. Toodle pip.